Thank you. Woo! Thanks so much. Hi.
Hi.
Well, thank you so much for the beautiful introduction, wherever you went. And Amishi, for all your really hard work. It's a lot of work, really, behind the scenes. And I'm just very excited. It's quite wonderful. Not only am I excited because I left New York City and got to come to Miami, which today is living up to its reputation. In the car, Michael was driving me here, and I thought, I left my sunglasses in the house. I brought them all the way to Miami, but maybe tomorrow. But it's such a tremendous delight to come together with people and explore these things, and more than anything, to have the chance to practice. Even though I have written a number of books now, and I teach so much, I often find the words are quite tricky that we utilize. We make a lot of assumptions around certain words, we hear certain things in certain ways, and then it's really our own deeper experience that kind of opens up a whole perspective, and that's the most important thing. Anyway, so how great we have the chance to be together in this beautiful room, in this beautiful place, and be practicing together. So I usually wait, probably many of you ask for a precise schedule. I almost never have a precise schedule. Although I will say I'm a total night owl, and I couldn't have been happier to see the schedule. Because usually I'm negotiating, do we really need to start at 9 a.m.? Couldn't we do 9:30? Just like 12:30. Well, I'm coming back. It was great. I taught in Barcelona this last November, and it was the first time I'd ever been there, and I thought, oh, those are really my people. It's like, okay, let's take a 4-hour break. Dinner 10 p.m. Great. It was really like my inner rhythm. So here we are, and tomorrow's schedule is different, I know. One of the things I wait for in terms of dividing up the time, of course, is to see who's in the room, to see what the walking or movement spaces are like, and see how many bathrooms there are, because sometimes those lines are like awesome. And then, of course, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for questions and dialogue, and to sort of see if that seems to need more time or less time, or whatever it is. The only thing I know is fixed today is a half-hour snack break, which I think is just so amusing. It's like preschool. We've got our pads to go out and Nikes, and we have our snacks, and dedicated time for the snack. It's great. Okay, so how many people were at my talk yesterday afternoon? Okay. There will be a slight amount of repetition, just slight in the beginning. Not that much. How many people, just out of curiosity, flew to get here from some other place? Where did you come from?
Boston.
Boston, very good. Although you missed that snowstorm.
I did, they're having one.
Last Saturday.
Oh, right, I was there for that.
Yeah. Anybody else? Everyone else live close to Miami?
No.
Where?
St. Petersburg, Florida.
How far away is it?
About 5 hours.
Oh my God, thank you for coming.
Closer to New York.
Yeah, it's closer than New York. How many people are new to meditation practice? Great. So we're gonna look at some of the principles of cultivating awareness and compassion that underlie any sort of meditation practice. Have different kinds of experiences, get to discuss them, and hopefully have fun in its own unusual sort of way. So what I was saying yesterday, this is the slightly repetitious part, was that meditation practice can be seen as a skills training. It certainly doesn't need to be tied to a belief system or a dogma. You don't have to assume a certain identity or reject anything else. It really is about deepening the force of our own awareness and deepening the force of our own compassion, both compassion for ourselves and compassion as a kind of way of being in the world. Sometimes people think of meditation almost as a kind of like trance-like state, some special state of consciousness. But as I've understood it, as I said yesterday, it's been 45 years since I started meditating. It was January 1971 that I went to India. Meditation really is a skills training. It's not about having some special state. I mean, it could be, but it doesn't have to be at all. And ideally, it's not about having some special state that maybe we get a flash of and then it's gone, and we're longing for it and we feel bereft. It's also not about feeling you're not good enough and somehow you're going to get that super special experience and that's going to make you okay. But rather, it's more about a capacity, it is said, we all have as human beings for understanding our lives rather than just living mechanically, for being free of old conditioning, for really boundless love for ourselves and for others, for wisdom, for kindness. And this capacity within us is said to never be destroyed. Whatever we may go through, whatever our history is, our story, as a capacity, it's never ever destroyed. And so we practice meditation in some way to return there, to help nourish that capacity into reality, right? Actualization of it. So it's really not the case that we're starting from nothing. In Tibet, they have a kind of saying, it's like a translation thing. When we say meditation, they have what I consider a really cute phrase, which is getting used to it. Getting familiarized with it, getting used to it. So that brings up the question, of course, what's it? So that seems based on a belief that we have had, just as human beings living a life, by and large, we have had profound moments of connection and release and love and wisdom, but we don't tend to be awfully used to them. And even like tremendous suffering can bring us there. All kinds of things can bring us there. But maybe, we have that moment and then we think, what was that? I don't think I'll tell anyone about that. Or I think I'll tell everyone about that. And mostly it's, I don't know how to get back there, right? So it's not that we haven't had those experiences. We have had those experiences, but we don't tend to live there. And so that's another way of seeing the process of meditation, is that we're going to make a home in the deepest experiences we have and likely have already had. That's part of what can be potentially sort of fun about the whole process. We're going to do different kinds of sitting meditation. We're going to do walking or movement meditation. We can't waste the weather, so hopefully be able to get outside and do that, and have our snack. We'll have some time for questions. It's all good, right? So the skills training part can be looked at in terms of different strengths. The first is concentration, the second is mindfulness, and the third is loving kindness or compassion. And it's not that those are like divided up, like first I'm doing one and then I'm maybe someday doing two. They're all present, but it's also true that one of the three might be more emphasized in any particular day or method or whatever it is. So very often we start with concentration. Classically, the way this is done is we choose an object of awareness. We rest our attention on that object, not grab it, not get a death grip on it. We rest our attention on that object. Our minds go 1,000,000,000 miles away. That's normal. We let go, we come back. And then maybe 10 seconds later, we have to let go, and we come back. And over time, there is a great strength that happens. We feel centered. We feel more stable. Like all the stuff might come up, but we're not dragged into it all over the place. So they say that concentration has a couple of different benefits. It has many, but it has two really main ones. One is power, it's strength, because that's an awful lot of energy that might be available to us, but it's usually just flung everywhere. And I think you know, even if you sit down to think something through, it's usually not long before we're gone. Right? Our minds jump to the past, and we go over and over and over and over some situation, which we now cannot do anything about. Or our minds jump to the future, or our minds jump to the future, and we create a scenario that has not happened and may never happen. And we're filled with anxiety about that. I often tell the story about teaching with this friend of mine, Bob Thurman. He's a professor of Buddhist studies at Columbia University. We were teaching together in New York City, and I was speaking, and I just started describing like when my own mind goes into that kind of arc of anxiety. And I said, well, you know, it's like you're sitting on an airplane and it's sitting on the tarmac in one of the New York City airports. And then you think, I wonder if this plane's going to be late. Oh no, maybe it's going to be late. I bet it's going to be late. How late is it going to be? It's going to be incredibly late. It's going to be so late I'm going to miss the connection. Oh no, what's that going to mean? That's going to mean I'm going to land in Portland, Oregon. It's going to be after midnight. Oh no, what'll happen to me? Like, as though Portland was famous for people like disappearing if they landed after midnight. And I went on to say, well, when I see my mind spinning out that way, I have my own personal saying that I use, which is, something will happen. Like, there'll be a bus. I'll spend the night in the airport. It'll be okay. I don't even know if this plane's going to be late yet. So, you know, I've gone on and on about, you know, I'll land after midnight. There won't be any taxis. It's not a big city like New York. And so the reason I said I was teaching with Bob was that maybe 6 weeks after that class, he sent me an email and it simply said, just landed in Portland, how's the gas? When our minds create, you know, these scenarios, and they're not always very pleasant, are they? You know, they can be pretty harried, pretty scared, pretty anxious. So, the first thing we learn is to gather that energy. Our minds are so, and this is useless, you know, it's not like useful thinking about the past or useful planning for the future. We see that our energy is just way expended all over the place. We learn to gather and get more stable, come back. And as we do that, that's the power part, because that's a big amount of energy that might have been available to us, but hasn't been, because it's just flying all over the place. So over time, it does have that effect, where the energy does become available to us. The other great benefit is a kind of healing, because the larger life manifestation, that kind of distractedness, scatteredness, being all over the place, is a kind of fragmentation. It's the way, certainly in this society, we can feel so compartmentalized. The way people say so often, I feel like I'm one person at work and a different person at home. My favorite example of that thus far, I'm always up to a new favorite example, was I was teaching in New York City once, and a woman raised her hand and she said, I feel filled with loving kindness and compassion for all beings everywhere as long as I'm alone. But one with others is really rough. And everybody laughed because we don't do what she meant. And of course, it can be the other way around too. We might feel fine when we're with others and very ill at ease just being by ourselves, or our lives can be very divided, very split. And just that foundational exercise of deepening concentration really helps a lot. It's like a movement toward integration, toward the wholeness of our being. We have a sense of who we are, no matter what the external circumstance or the situation. So that's often where we begin. Bless you. Concentration, of course, we develop it in life. We develop in all kinds of different ways. In meditation practice, it's often developed by choosing an object of awareness, which could be anything. And here you have some of the many, many methods of meditation. It could be prayer, an image, visualization, a mantra, sound, something happening in your body. It could be loving kindness, which we'll do quite a bit of tomorrow. Very commonly, even if you use one of those other objects for at least part of one's practice, very commonly we choose the feeling of the breath, the actual sensations of the in and out breath. And in this system, it's just a normal, natural breath. You find the place where the breath is clearest for you or strongest for you. You bring your attention there and you rest. See if you can feel one breath, without regard to what's already gone by, without leaning forward for even the very next breath. Your whole world is just this one breath. And the breath is such a common object for a number of different reasons. As my early meditation teachers would say, you don't have to believe anything in order to feel your breath. You don't have to accept any kind of philosophical system. If you're breathing, you can be meditating. And then, as one teacher said, I always felt very charmingly, he said the breath is very portable. Right? So let's say you practice 10 minutes a day, formally, in a dedicated fashion, and you use the breath as the way to come back to yourself, to come back to the moment. Then you're at work. It's like a completely crazy scene. You're in traffic, as I happened to have been yesterday. You're on an airplane, as I was the day before, bouncing up and down. You don't have to look for special equipment or sit down cross-legged on the floor somewhere and look weird. You're breathing, right? It's there for you. Nobody even has to know you're doing it. You use the breath to anchor, to come back. Once you come back to the moment, you come back to yourself, we come back to what we really care about, to what we value. Right? And it's just right there, the breath. So, we can do this in a couple of minutes. We rest our attention on the feeling of the breath. It is so unlikely that it's going to be like 800 breaths before your mind wanders. Very, very unlikely. Maybe it'll be 2, maybe it'll be 1, maybe it'll be 8. But at some point, just through the force of conditioning, our attention wanders. So that's not something to judge. Here's where the self-compassion comes in. It's not something to judge. You don't have to feel like a failure. You don't have to think you blew it. Nothing bad has happened. Because that moment following our being distracted is considered the most important moment in that process. You've fallen asleep, you're a million miles away, and then you kind of emerge. And there's the realization like, oh, it's been quite some time since I last felt a breath. That's the moment. That's the moment we have the chance to be really different. So instead of judging ourselves and being down on ourselves, we practice letting go. It's what one of my teachers called exercising the letting go muscle. And we practice beginning again with kindness. There's a tremendous amount of self-compassion here. Even if it's described differently, even if those words are never used, we actually let go, and in kindness toward ourselves, we begin again. And if you have to do that again 10 seconds later, that's okay. We say the healing is in the return, not in never having wandered to begin with. That's the moment. We let go, we start over. Okay? Does that make sense? That's another reason why it can be kind of fun. Because those really sort of brutal self-judgments, they may arise, but they don't have to be that operative, right? They don't have to take over. So this, as I often say, was the first meditation instruction I ever learned. I went to India as a university student in 1970. I began my meditation practice in January of 1971, 15 years ago. Feels like maybe 10. And I began in the context of an intensive 10-day retreat. I'd never practiced before I went into that retreat. And this was the very first instruction I ever heard. Sit down and feel your breath. And as I'm sure I said yesterday as well, my first reaction was to be very disappointed. I thought, feel my breath? I came all the way to India. Where's the magical, esoteric, fantastic technique that's going to wipe out all my suffering? I don't feel my breath. I've been going to school in Buffalo, New York, so I thought, I could have stayed in Buffalo to feel my breath. And then I thought, how hard can this be? And I was like, whoa, this is not so easy. I did have the thought, okay, what will it be like? 800 breaths, 900 breaths before my mind wanders, and to my astonishment, it was like 1 or 2, and I'd be gone, and I'd be way gone. And I heard over and over and over exactly what I was just saying to you. The most important moment is the next moment after you've been distracted, where you practice letting go, and you practice beginning again, and I didn't believe it. Therein lies a lot of suffering, right? And it doesn't have to be that way. It's like a switch in perspective that is true. It's not just to feel better, it's actually the truth. That's how the process develops. And there's something about being able to begin again and having a sense of renewal and resilience and forgiving ourselves for having made a mistake and not spending a year and a half just berating ourselves so we're exhausted. It doesn't mean we're dull, it doesn't mean we don't need to learn anything, but the other extreme is just not that helpful. So many times when I talk about self-compassion, which begins right there, you've been distracted, you let go, you start over, and then you watch it grow and come into your life in all these different ways. People often say, well, that's just like being weak, that's like being lazy. I'll make a mistake, so what? I'll forgive myself, and I'll make another one in 10 seconds, doesn't matter. But it's really not that way. Because if we look at how anything evolves, how we make progress, how we go for excellence in anything, nothing in life, I would say, is a straight shot. We go forward, we fall down. We have to get up or let others help us up. We have to start over. We have a huge dream, a really big aspiration. We forget it. We have to remember, right? I think it's like the rhythm of life itself, that we're always like starting over and readjusting and coming back. And it's just how things are. And if we can be in harmony with that, we can really keep going in a much healthier, more realistic way. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about quality of mindfulness, and then we're going to take half an hour in silence where you can do walking meditation, or just sitting outside meditation, or or your snack. We're going to have another half an hour break a little later, so it's not your only snack chance. It's really up to you. We're just laying out your options. So mindfulness is the second great skill. It builds upon that greater stability of awareness that comes through concentration. And basically, it's applying that same kind of stable, interested attention to a wider range of experience. Mindfulness classically means a quality of awareness where our perception of what's going on in the moment is not so distorted by bias, like old fears, or maybe something really painful is happening in your body or emotionally, and right away you start projecting it, like what's it going to feel like next week? What's it going to feel like next month? So you're not just feeling what's happening right now, you have now added on top all of this other anticipation, right? And you're trying to bear it all at once. So there are many ways in which we get lost in add-ons, and that's not bad. It's not like we're trying to destroy that capacity of the mind to interpret, to have supposition, but when it's really fast and it just takes over, we kind of lose touch often with what our experience is actually in the moment. So the story I usually tell about that is I was teaching with my friend, my colleague, Joseph Goldstein somewhere, and Joseph and I were sitting in a kitchen having a cup of tea, and somebody came into the kitchen, this man in some distress, and he said to Joseph, I had a really terrible experience. And Joseph said, well, what happened? And he said, I felt all of this tension in my jaw, and I realized what an incredibly uptight person I am, and how I always have been and I always will be. And Joseph said, you mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw? And he said, yeah, I've never been able to get close to people, it's never going to change. Joseph said, as you might imagine, you mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw? It was really interesting for me, like watching them go back and forth and back and forth. Finally, Joseph said something like, why are you adding a miserable self-image to a painful experience? It's like painful enough, genuinely so, to feel that tension in your jaw. It's not like it's suddenly going to get delightful. But on top of that, we now have I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. Right? So one of the ways we describe mindfulness is a quality of awareness where we look for the add-ons. And we see if we can relinquish the hold of some of them to get a cleaner, clearer sense of what our experience actually is right now. Right? So there are ways in which, there's so many ways in which we tend to add on just habitually. Something's really beautiful, it's wonderful, it's a great experience, and we get completely ensnared in how can I make sure it happens again next year? Or whatever that kind of holding is, right? I'm so afraid it's going to go away, so then we're not even enjoying it anymore. Or something painful is happening, and we are just adding, blaming ourselves and shame. And I should have been able to stop this. I should be in total control of everything. Or I am the only one. A sense of isolation. There's so many things we tend to add on. This is a story, a new story. I heard when I was teaching a retreat pretty recently at this place called the Garrison Institute with a colleague of mine, this woman, Sylvia Borstein. And Sylvia told this story about her then 9-year-old granddaughter named Honor. So I promised her if I ever used this story, I would make a point of saying Honor's name and that she was 9 years old. So they were preparing the plates for Seder dinner for Passover. And so Sylvia said to Honor, I want you to take a teaspoonful of horseradish and put it on each piece of gefilte fish. And Honor said, I never realized before now that you can take something truly terrible and make it even worse. And then Sylvia hastened to say, I happen to make really good gefilte fish. And I hastened to say, I really like horseradish. I think of gefilte fish as a delivery system for horseradish. Nonetheless, this was Honor's experience, and it's so cute. I never thought you could take a truly terrible thing and make it even worse. And you know what? We can. So, I think some things in life are actually truly terrible. I don't think any amount of responding differently to them is going to make them other than that. Some things really hurt. But on top of that, we can have add-ons. And things can be even worse. Right? So it's not a question of blaming oneself, but understanding that there is suffering in life, and then there's like extra suffering just from all of those habits. So we kind of know that, just from our lives, like you can have some real difficult thing going on, but you don't feel alone, you feel like you're part of a community, you're allowing people to try to help you, you're helping other people. It's like a very different experience, even though the same sort of thing is going on. So what are we adding on to this moment? We have pleasant experience, we have painful experience, we also have what are known as neutral experiences. They're not very pleasant, they're not very unpleasant. We just kind of snooze, I think in general, we're not awfully trained to subtlety. We tend to need intensity in order to feel alive. And when things are just like routine, repetitive, and neutral, it's like just another breath, just another cup of tea, same old tea, nothing novel, nothing exciting. We tend to numb out and just sort of wait for something better to go on. So that's what we tend to add to neutral experience. So whether our experience in the moment is really pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, we just have certain habits. And the force of mindfulness is one where we recognize that habit is coming up, we see if we can gently let it go, and come back to the experience as it is. And of course we're going to talk a whole lot more about that. So we say because of that mindfulness is a relational experience. It's not about what's happening, it's about how we're relating to what's happening. We practice informal sitting, where we expand the field of awareness beyond the breath to stuff happening in our bodies, our emotional landscape, and so on. We practice informal walking meditation, although walking is also symbolic. If you have a physical issue with walking, or you just would rather not walk, it doesn't matter. You can do the same exercise in another form, which I'll describe in a minute. That means like eyes open, activity, an activity that we might normally do really mechanically, just in some zone. Either because we're multitasking, especially these days. I was actually walking down the streets of New York City, and some guy was texting, and he barged right into me. And I thought, wow, you're like a stereotype, But it happens. We learn to, it's like an exercise, it is practice. For a little bit of time, try to do one thing at a time. So we can feel it, we can experience it, we can notice those add-ons, we can let go. This is a beautiful quotation from the late theologian Howard Thurman, who said, "Look at the world with quiet eyes." Look at the world with quiet eyes. And I always felt like, more normally, we're often like those cartoon characters whose eyes are out on springs, like, look at that beautiful tree. I need one. No, I need to grow a garden. Wait a minute, I live in New York City. You can't grow that tree in a, little window box. I've got to move to Miami, right? So we're just like out there. And so when our eyes are open and we realize that that's like an add-on. We gentle our gaze. We relax. We look at the world with quiet eyes. It doesn't mean we're disconnected. We're actually more connected. So we're not so wrapped up in all of those reactions. So we practice mindfulness sitting, we practice mindfulness walking or moving. We also practice mindfulness in activities. These are usually very relatively brief times when, we're drinking that cup of tea, as an example. So rather than drinking the cup of tea and it being the same time that you're checking your email and the same time you're in a conference call, and the same time that you've got the TV on mute and you're reading the crawl, you actually just drink the cup of tea. Feel the warmth of the teacup. Smell the tea. You taste the tea. It's not going to take very long. It's not going to ruin your whole day or everything to get done. But it's a very different experience. So we just kind of drop in, right? In my time in Asia, when I was practicing in Nepal, I had a very venerable old Tibetan teacher at one point, and the way he put it was this. He said, short moments many times. That's your goal throughout the day. Short moments many times. The taking of a few breaths now and then. The very typical recommendation these days is don't pick up the phone on the first ring. Let it ring 3 times and breathe. Then you pick it up. Those I said in the law school, I was teaching at a financial firm in New York City, and I said that, and I looked up and I saw the complete panic on everyone's face. And I said, okay, for you, just twice. Just let it ring twice and breathe, and then you pick it up. Or when you finish writing that email, before you press send, maybe take a few breaths and read it again, or before a meeting. So there's just lots of things, and of course we'll keep talking about that, but it's just to help us have short moments many times, because they make a difference. When we're caught up in this crazy momentum, there's so much going on, it's like, okay. And it's, of course, not only the breath, it's seeing our intention, it's seeing our motivation. It's feeling the warmth of that teacup. Smelling the tea, tasting the tea. If we don't do that, and we drink the cup of tea, we're completely distracted, we don't feel much fulfillment at all. And we don't tend to be trained to think, could my lack of attention be playing any role in my lack of fulfillment? Mostly we blame the tea, right? I use really inferior tea bag, I can't believe it. I'm so awful, and not only that, why am I using tea bags anyway? I could go out and go to that gourmet tea shop, and I could buy loose tea, and I could buy a tea ball, and I could buy a strainer, and I could heat the water so that it's the perfect temperature. Maybe you do all that, but you drink that cup of tea the same way you drank the old cup of tea. It's still not very fulfilling. And you think, maybe I have to go to India to get the tea. I've got to get the tea, right? I have to make it myself, right? So this is what we call a spiral addiction, right? Something else has to happen. There needs to be something else. But really, there's no fulfillment ultimately in that cycle. It's much more fulfilling to feel the warmth of the teacup and smell the tea and taste the tea. That's what actually gives us a sense of connection to our lives. Even though it sounds really simplistic, I know. It's one of those things that does sound simplistic, but in the actualization of it, it can make a big difference. So we also bring mindfulness into activity in that way. I had one teacher, a Burmese meditation teacher, who came to the center I co-founded in Barre, Massachusetts. He came in 1984. And he taught a 3-month retreat, which I sat under his guidance. We'd never met him before, but we heard he was a really great teacher, so we invited him. And he is a great teacher, and he's also like extremely tough and demanding and intense a teacher. And we were meeting him 6 days a week, each of us individually, for just these short meetings to describe our meditation practice and get some feedback from him. He also had a sort of habit where he would tend to say the same thing again and again and again and again until something shifted inside of you. So, and this was a completely silent retreat, so I had a lot of friends also sitting, but I didn't know what he was telling them, you know? So we were asked to describe one sitting meditation and one walking meditation from the previous 24 hours. So most of us just took some notes, you know, like I sat down, I got sleepy right away, it was whatever, just so we had the information. But he and I went through this long thing where I would go in with my notes, and before I could read them, he would look at me and say, "Tell me everything you noticed when you washed your face," which was nothing. So I'd leave. And I'd do sitting meditation, I'd do walking meditation as mindfully as I could. And when I washed my face, I'd feel my hands in the water. I'd feel the water on my face. Now this doesn't mean other things don't come up. Of course other things don't come up. But what we come back to is the immediate experience, right? Gently. So I'd go in to see him the next day, and before I could say anything, he'd say, "Tell me everything you noticed when you took off your shoes," which was nothing. So I left, and I'd sit, and I'd walk, and I'd try to wash my face really mindfully in case he went back to that. And I'd took off my shoes and feel all these sensations, and I'd come in the next day, and he'd say, "Tell me everything you noticed when you opened the door," which was nothing. So I quickly saw where things were going. In my mind, I called it the torment of continuity. But in reality, it was fantastic. It was like everything opened up. You know, there was just a sense of connection with anything. I didn't need something special to happen. The real thing wasn't happening just in the meditation hall. It was a very living quality of presence, of connection, like it happened with anything. So we do both. We have a formal, dedicated period of time of sitting, of walking, and we also kind of play. You know, some of you who follow me on Twitter, or I saw once, I saw myself quoted on Twitter, which of course is just 140 characters or less, and it said, "Sometimes just drink a cup of tea," Sharon Salzberg. And I thought, that makes no sense out of context. Like, what in the world does that mean? Like, what a pearl of wisdom. But it does make sense in context. So sometimes we just drink a cup of tea, sometimes we just feel our hands in the water. And even if it's just short moments, we can do it many times, and it actually really changes our day. So walking meditation, some basic principles. Eyes open. And again, you don't have to do walking. I'll talk about it in a minute, you know, and other alternatives, but let's say you're walking. Some schools of meditation really urge you to still rest your attention on the feeling of the breath as you're walking. That was never the way I was taught. I was taught in mindfulness, we're going to do loving kindness walking tomorrow, but in mindfulness that you rest your attention on the sensations, maybe your feet touching the ground, or the feeling of your leg coming up, going down, or your body moving through space. That becomes what we call the primary object, or the home base for attention. Of course, your mind goes a billion other places, and you just come back. It needs to be a very light awareness. You're not trying to hunker down and block out what's going on around you, but it gives you a way of being present in what is normally a completely mechanical activity, right? And so we just have a simple way using the sensations in the body to kind of ground and be present with what's happening. In a formal sense, walking meditation is sometimes done in 3 speeds. You have to really see where you are. If you're in a protected environment, it's fine to experiment with 3 speeds. If you're walking down the streets of Miami, I don't suggest it. Or, I don't know exactly what would be outside, but the first speed is just pretty fast. And you're just walking back and forth. So what you're aware of is your foot like touching. And then if you feel like it, you slow down somewhat, and you can feel your leg coming up, going down. Next leg coming up, going down. And this is not an anatomical exercise. It's not like you're trying to figure out this muscle group's doing this, that muscle group's doing that. You're feeling heaviness, lightness. You don't want to name these things, but that's where your attention is, right? And then, if you're in the right atmosphere, and you can slow down a whole lot. Not so much that you lose balance, but kind of slowly lift your leg up, move it forward, place it down, shift your weight, next leg up, forward, down. It's very exquisite looking. It looks like Tai Chi or something like that. It also looks exceedingly weird. I once was teaching, became a spa. It was like a growth center in Austin. And it was like way up the top of this hill. And the woman from the organization who was managing my course told me that her first day at work, I think she started out working in the kitchen, so she was there really early in the morning. And John Kabat-Zinn, who was the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction, was teaching a course there. So she said she was in her car and she's going up this hill. She gets to the top and there are all these like zombies walking. And she said it was all I could do not to get back in my car and just leave. Mindfulness, being aware of what our experience is without falling into an immediate state of reactivity. It doesn't mean you never feel anything about anything, or you never take action, but it's that kind of driven, immediate, reflexive, habitual reaction we're trying to disentangle from. So, example I use sometimes is if you're on your way to a party and you run into a friend and they said, oh, you know who I just met? I met our new colleague and this person's going to work with us. And they are so boring. And then you go to the party and who do you end up stuck talking to? But that very person you have just been told is so boring. So it's so unlikely that you'll really listen to them or really look at them. More likely you'll be thinking, if your emails or whatever, we're looking around like, who else would it be better to talk to? Like anybody. And maybe you realize that and you just think, you know what? I don't even know from my own experience that I find this person really boring. That was someone else's impression that I just took on. So what if for now I let go of it and I really listen? And I really look. So maybe you do that, and at the end of the evening you walk out of that party and you think, wow, that person, they are so boring. But maybe not, because life is full of surprises when we pay attention. So we do have responses and reactions and feelings and the whole gamut of life, but we want them to be free, right? And not so bound to just an immediate reactivity and prior assumption and what we've been told and things like that. But mindfulness is not a passive, complacent state. I used the example I was teaching yesterday of the languaging that's often used to describe mindfulness very accurately still, as a series of words, can apply to us just being sort of inert and never taking any action, being very passive. So words, phrases like, mindfulness means being with your experience without judging. Mindfulness means being with things, accepting them the way that they are. So those are all true, and in a very deep sense, but the ordinary conventional way of taking those words can be very passive. So for example, I was teaching somewhere and I started the instruction the way we started this morning, let's sit and listen to sound. And immediately somebody raised their hand and said, well, what if it's the sound of the smoke alarm going off? Should I sit here mindfully, knowing that the smoke alarm is going off, or should I get out of the way? Should I get up? And I said, I'd get up. Right? But it sounds that way. So that's why I said earlier on, it's really through our own experience that we can sense the kind of dynamic nature of mindfulness. It's not just like, okay, I'm accepting everything in this superficial kind of passive sort of way at all. It's very, very different than that. When we pay attention to what is, one way that's kind of classical and expanding to more mindfulness, which we'll do in a few minutes, is to sit and pay attention to whatever is functioning as your anchor, like the feeling of the breath. And then when little loopy things come up, you can stay connected to the breath. You just let them flow on by. You don't have to follow them. You certainly don't have to fight them. And then when something comes up with a bang, strong sensation, strong emotion, strong pattern of thinking, spend a few moments just recognizing this is what's happening right now. There's joy, there's sorrow, there's thinking, there's planning. You don't have to do that verbally. That is actually a particular mindfulness technique where if the word comes easily, then you do apply a label. Again, so it's just for a predominant experience, and the word has to come easily. In some point in my early practice, I found myself sitting there thinking, is this pain or is this discomfort? Is there something in between pain and discomfort? So it's a complete waste of time. And my sittings really resembled somebody sitting down and reading a thesaurus. So it doesn't have to be that precise. But if the word comes easily, it can help us point back to the direct experience instead of like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm angry again. I've meditated for 45 years as a little person, and I'm still angry. I knew I should never have left India. Or I've spent $10,000 in therapy just last year, and I'm still angry. I knew that was going to hurt. Right? If we're noting anger, it helps us not fall into those reactive states and just, okay, this is what's happening right now. So you don't have to use the word by any means, but it's one option. And it may be an option you want to experiment with, at least from time to time. In the beginning, it can feel very awkward, and over time, it can feel much better. One of the ways I've really enjoyed using mental noting, first of all, it helps if your tendency is towards sleepiness and sluggishness. It helps pick up your energy. And also, it helps kind of reform a relationship to your experience. So, people often talk about the inner critic, the kind of repetitive voice, putting ourselves down. And I had this experience once. I was, a friend of ours had rented a house for several of us to do a retreat in. And when I moved into the bedroom that had been set aside for me, I saw that someone had left a cartoon on the desk. from the Peanuts comic strip. So in the first frame of the cartoon, Lucy is talking to Charlie Brown, and she says, "You know what your problem is, Charlie Brown? The problem with you is that you're you." Then in the second frame, poor Charlie Brown says, "Well, what in the world can I do about that?" And then in the third and final frame, Big Lucy says, "I don't pretend to be able to give advice, I merely point out the problem." And somehow, whenever I was doing walking meditation by that desk, my eye would fall right on that line. The problem with you is that you're you. Like if you really knew who you were, it would be a sad story. Because that Lucy voice had been so incredibly dominant in my earlier life. So, I also spent quite a bit of time in meditation approaches that use mental noting, although there are many, as I said, that do not. So I felt like out of seeing that cartoon, I got 2 new notes. So it was like, first of all, I got to name my inner critic, right, Lucy? And 2 notes. So maybe something great would happen for me, and my very next thought would be, it's never going to happen again. And I'd note it, "Hi, Lucy." Or my favorite form of that was, "Chill out, Lucy." Notice, neither of those, "Hi, Lucy," or "Chill out, Lucy," is, "You're right, Lucy, you're always right." Nor is it, "I can't believe Lucy is still here, what a defeat." Right? It's like, this is what's happening right now, and developing a different relationship to it, not the sort of forlorn hope that it'll go away, never to come back. It doesn't matter. In certain approaches in meditation, they would say, especially if your tendency is to see that Lucy voice and freak out. "I'm so bad, I'm so terrible, I'm so ashamed. I should have been able to destroy Lucy long ago." Then to help create a kind of balance, they suggest something like, well, invite Lucy in for a meal. Don't give her the run of the house, right? Keep an eye on her, but you don't have to be so afraid. She's just visiting. You're stronger than she is, actually. So invite her in for a meal. So I was teaching in Marriott, the Insight Meditation Study, once I suggested that. Someone else in the room didn't like it. So I said, "How about a cup of tea?" Invite Lucy in for a cup of tea. And they said, "How about a cup of tea to go?" Whatever you want, you know. And you can hear the relationship in the tone of voice of the note. Is it like, "Lucy?" Or is it like, "Hi, Lucy?" Or "Chill out, Lucy." So it gives us another avenue to kind of change that relationship. So that's mindfulness, neither falling into what's arising in the moment nor fighting it and hating it and feeling bad that we're experiencing it. It slices right through both those. This place in the middle. That's why we say you can't be having a wrong experience in terms of mindfulness. You can have one you'd rather not have. You can have one, if you ran into a friend on the street tonight, you'd rather not have that experience to talk about from today. It's much more pleasant for us socially to say, first it was, a little restless, but then the most profound peace came over me, and then it was like this dazzling, brilliant white light, and then, was it bliss, was it ecstasy, this extraordinary state. It is much more gratifying than first I was restless, then I got sleepy, then I got angry, and then my knee hurt, and my nose itched, but that's not to say any of that latter is bad meditation. It's not. Because everything depends on how we're relating to what's coming up. Not itself what is coming up. And it's hard to find the words, it's hard to describe it, but that's what's really important. So you can't be having the wrong experience. And we say you can't fail at this because everything is about more and more bringing more balance, more awareness, more love, more compassion to what we are seeing in each moment. Okay? So, and I was teaching in Boston, I think, last year in the middle of 9 million feet of snow. And I told that story, and then we took a break, and I was on my way to the bathroom, and people started stopping me and telling me in other modalities altogether, they had like named their inner critic. It was kind of fun. Somebody's inner critic was Sid Vicious. Okay, but that's the relationship, right? So we play, we experiment with that.